Hello and welcome to my forge. Mini WarMutt made a call for a painting challenge for January and I take part in it. But I also thought, why not also let my subscribers take part in it? I'm going to paint Bretonnia Knights of the Realm, but the colors and symbols of the coat of arms were chosen by my viewers. At this point, greetings to Elwood's Modeling Mayhem for John the Weir, the knight in red and yellow, X for Sir Kemarn of Norowek in the colors of Norway, to Daniel for Sir Franz von Soden in red and white, Smoothbrush for William de la Tour in green, to Boshuka Games for Sir Benedict the Book in white and blue, to Beer Warrior for Sir Brock de la Servoise in the colors of the House of Wittelsbach, MaTTabletop for Sir Aquilon the Honorable in the colors of House Arran, and Balduin for Reineke von Fuchsburg with a black fox as a sigil. Thank you for partaking, and now let's start painting. John de Weir threw back the blanket and massaged his stiff limbs. It were mornings like these that reminded him of the fact that he wasn't 20 anymore, and that despite of all his weapons and riding training, he grew accustomed to some amenities, like a comfortable bed. Nevertheless, Baron Tancred de Corville had called his vassals to arms to defend his land against an attack of beastmen. The Baron's messenger had left the estate, and Sir John followed the call of his lord with his bannermen. Sir John even didn't sit completely upright when a squire with a steaming cup walked up to him. "Hot wine, my lord. Sir Kemarn sends his regards." John looked over to the small campfire. His old friend Kemarn stood next to it, stirring in a cauldron. When he noticed the look of his lord, he raised his cup in a toasting gesture. Sir John drank his cup in large sips and felt the warmth of the wine spreading in his body. After a cold night, there was nothing better. Well, after a cold night spent on the cold earth, every bit of warmth was welcome. He hadn't finished his cup as the squires approached him with his armor. "Sir John, your armor. By order of Baron Tancred, we will set off in half an hour." Henry the squire bowed, and he and the other squires started to equip their lord. When the last belt was fastened and the last clasp closed, John's horse was ready. He got in the saddle and the squire handed him his shield. He waved off a larger breakfast, a bowl of broth and a cup of hot wine had to suffice. From the back of his horse he looked around. The men-at-arms fell into line. Some of them looked as if they hadn't slept at all. A group of knights errant who had come in the retinue of another knight were already in the saddle and waited impatiently to set off. John de Weir put the shield on his arm as William de la Tour rode next to him. William de la Tour had bent his knees slightly, so the squires had it easier to pull his tabard over his armor. William had ordered his squire to wake him before sunrise and took care that everything was ready when the knights were woken up. William de la Tour was a cousin to Sir John, and his family had been given a fief a long time ago by the de Weir family. His grandfather had always claimed that it had been given to them in the times of Gilles le Breton. The fief wasn't big and nearly unsuited for agriculture. The small wood which was on it also didn't produce that much timber. But the gently rolling hills were more than suited for sheep farming. So since human remembered, the de la Tours had owned large flocks of sheep which had made the family wealthy. William was John de Weir's steward and standard bearer. He had followed his lord on many campaigns and carried his lord's colors with pride. Now he did what he also did on the estate. He took care that everything was ready when the army would set off, and that every man in his lord's retinue would at least have had a bite of bread and a bowl of broth. When the squires woke the knights at dawn, William already had eaten his bread and drunken his broth. He mounted and rode to his lord. Time to unfold the banners. Kemarn gave wine in the cauldron and watched it filling with the dark red liquid. 1 cup for everyone it should be. The squires would get the leftovers. Through the warmth, the wine unfolded his aroma and the spicy scent came from the cauldron. One squire stepped closer. "This smells very good, sir." Kemarn turned around and saw young Philip, who, curious, held his nose over the cauldron. The knight smiled. "Yes, it does, and it's not for curious squires. And now go and take care of the horses." The sun just had started to rise when Philip had woken Sir Kemarn and helped to don on his armor. He looked around and saw Sir John getting up. He grabbed the cup and filled it to the rim. "Philip," he called after his squire. The young man turned around and hurried back to his master. Kemarn handed him the cup for Sir John. Philip bowed and went to Sir John to hand him the cup. Kemarn toasted to John de Vere, who answered the gesture. Then he saw the squires bring John's armor. Kemarn drank his wine in one great sip and turned towards his horse, which had been already prepared for him and was waiting. Sir Aquilin tightened the buckles of his saddles as Philip went past him carrying a hot drink for Sir John. A faint scent of spices and red wine waved around Aquilin's nose. He took a deep breath, savoring the aroma even if it was only faintly perceptible. Suddenly, his warhorse stomped its hoofs. Aquilin pulled his foot away just in time, earning a disapproving look from the animal. He gently stroked the horse's nostrils. "Seems like the strap was a bit too tight, huh?" He reassured the creature, loosening the strap slightly, which was rewarded with a contented snort. His father had always told him, "The most important companion in battle, aside from your fellow knights, is your horse. Treat it well and it will serve you faithfully and never let you down." Sir Aquilin had often been teased about being destined to become a horse as originally intended by the lady, but she had changed her mind in the last moment. However, despite the friendly mockery when it came to horses, all knights from Sir John de Vere's retinue came to him. De Vere himself had long recognized that Aquilin had a true understanding of horses and entrusted him with the management of the stables. The war horses they bred now may not be as renowned as those from other breeders, but in a few years, maybe. Aquilin gently stroked his warhorse's nostrils again, and the animal snorted in contentment. Meanwhile, Kemarn, also fully armored, approached Aquilin and handed him a cup. "I can't offer you water, my friend, but a cup of wine should do," Kemarn said with a wink. Aquilin accepted the cup, and the scent of red wine and spices filled his nose. Perhaps Kemarn was too focused on earthly pleasures, but it never hurt to have someone in the camp who could turn simple hard bread, beef and cheese into a tasty meal. He made a mental note to ask Kemarn after the battle where he had learned such skills. Benedict the Book drank the broth and chewed listlessly on the crust of bread. He was glad to have something other than jerky to eat, and the warm broth chased away the cold from his body. He had already greedily consumed the hot wine earlier, which had awakened his spirits. Now he tightened the straps of Strife's saddle. One of his squires could have done that, but he always checked his squire's work before riding into battle. He knew Brian performed his duties conscientiously and with care, but he always made sure that everything was in order, because a loose or even torn saddle strap could mean his demise. However, Brian had done his task diligently, and all the straps were tightened and in good condition. Benedict mounted his horse and looked around. There was a bustle of activity throughout the camp. A good portion of the camp still looked as if a horde of outlaws were encamped here, but most were already armed and ready for battle. The pages would remain behind with a few warriors to pack up the few belongings that the knights had managed to bring with them and then follow the army. Corville had held off the siege by the Beastmen for at nearly 2 weeks now. Well, Benedict thought, there were a Grail Knight, a Maiden of the Lady, and even the knights errant who had been at Baron Tancred's court as reinforcements. The village would hold its ground. Sir Brock passed the whetstone over the blade of his axe. The sound of the stone sliding against the metal had a soothing and familiar effect. He was already wearing his armor and sat on a large stone. Brock had never needed much sleep, and he had awakened well before sunrise. Usually, squires woke their knights. In Sir Brock's case, it was usually the other way round, but it didn't bother him. He simply woke up before his squire, and why should he punish his squire for that? It would be unfair and unworthy. Besides, he wouldn't be setting a good example for his squire that way. Again the whetstone glided over the blade. He carefully ran his thumb along the edge of the weapon and nodded in satisfaction. Even a light armor would not withstand the power with which he swung his axe. If the beasts had plate armor, then it would be different, but even then, the impact of the axe would be tremendous. Sir Brock began to draw the stone over the blade again. Everyone had their own way of dealing with the time before battle. De la Tour immersed himself in his duties as a steward. Aquilin took care of his horse, which some claimed he knew better than his own wife. Sir Benedict checked his equipment, examining every buckle and strap to make sure they were in good condition. He had learned that from his lord and passed it on to his squires. Kemarn had the strangest habit. He cooked, and it was especially impressive what he could do with simple ingredients. Once he had cooked a stew using hard bread, cheese, wine and spices, and he had to give the recipe to Sir John's cook. And if rumors were true, they had even served the stew at Baron Tancred's table. And Brock himself? He sharpened his axe before every fight. When he saw Sir John mount his horse, he slid the whetstone into the pouch on his belt and swung himself into the saddle. He hung the axe from the saddle. He would need it soon enough. John de Vere looked around. His knights were all gathered. Well, almost all of them. As often was the case, Reineke and Franz were missing. Reineke was his cousin's son. Years ago, she had followed her father into exile in the lands of the Border Princes. Letters had come from time to time, so John knew that his cousin had married the son of a noble from the Empire and had a son of her own. A few years ago, Reineke and his friend Franz von Soden had shown up at the ancestral home of the de Veres. In their luggage was a letter from Reineke's mother, asking John to instruct the young man in the chivalrous virtues. After their errantry, both had entered John's service, but sometimes the two still behaved as if they were still knights-errant. Reineke and Franz looked down from the hill at the devastated landscape. It would take a long time for anything to grow here again. The friends looked at each other and shook their heads. Although they had grown up in the border princedoms, they had never seen anything like this. They turned their horses around and returned to the camp, just in time as they noticed. The knights were getting ready and mounting their horses. At the head of the army, they could see Baron Tancred knighting his bastard. They trotted their horses through the pages and younger squires, making their way to their lord's banner. John de Vere nodded to Reineke, who rode at his side. Franz took his place in the line behind Reineke. The army started moving, and with his son at their backs, they headed towards Coville. And here the completed knights. Thank you to all my viewers who participated by contributing colors and names for the knights. If you have enjoyed the video, feel free to like, share and subscribe. Leave a comment below, ring the bell, and we'll see us soon in my forge.